We're very honored today to have the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee here today at the Economic Club of Washington. And what I'd like to do is just briefly introduce our guests. I think most members here know them, but for those who might be watching on C-SPAN or others who may not be familiar with them, just very briefly, Senator Baucus is the senior senator from Montana. He's been a senator now for about 35 years, the third most senior senator in the United States Senate now. He's in his sixth term. He served previously 2 terms in the House of Representatives. He's a native of Montana, educated as undergraduate at Stanford and his law degree at Stanford, and went back to Montana after he got his law degree, and has announced not long ago that he will not run for a 7th term. So he will be retiring at the end of this Congress, and I think he will feel the joys of liberation at that point, probably. But he's done an extraordinary job as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and is now in the middle of all the things we're going to talk about today. We have Congressman Camp, who is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman Camp is from Michigan, represents the 4th District of Michigan, and he has been a member of the House of Representatives for several terms, but been the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee since 2011. When he first became the chairman, he previously was chairman since 2011, January 2011. Is that correct?
Yes.
January 2011, and is going to serve through the end of this Congress in that capacity. There's a term limit for leadership in the House Ways and Means Committee and all House chairmanships, so he would be term limited unless there was an exception, and so he would be serving as the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee unless there's a change through the end of this Congress. He is a native of Michigan, graduate of Albion College and University of San Diego Law School, and returned after law school to Michigan, where he practiced law for a number of years before getting elected to the Michigan House of Representatives and then becoming a member of the United States House of Representatives. So, both of you gentlemen are doing something very unusual in Washington, which is getting together from both parties, a Democrat and a Republican. You don't see that much of that being done today, and you have announced that you'd like to see whether you can have a bipartisan tax reform package. To be realistic about it, is there any chance in this Congress, with the tensions between the Democrats, Republicans, and the Republicans in the House and the President of the United States, getting a comprehensive tax reform? What would you rate as the chances of a tax reform package going through, Senator and then Chairman?
Sure. Well, I think quite good. Why? Because everyone knows that the code's dated. It hasn't been brought up to date since '86. 15,000 changes to the code since then. There are a lot of provisions that which caused some U.S. companies to be less competitive. Top corporate rates too high compared to other countries. We have to be much more competitive as a country than we are, with respect to the code. Other countries have modernized their codes where we have not. In addition, people in the country, I think, are extremely put out with how complex the code is. It takes too long to figure out. 90% of Americans need somebody else to fill out their tax returns. Either it's TurboTax or with another preparer. And they feel too, I think, that somebody else is getting a break that they're not getting. It's starting to erode confidence in our country. But beyond that, here we are, Dave and I, we're working together. One Republican, one Democrat, chairman of the relevant committees, and everyone in the Congress wants tax reform. It's different from health care, which in the past was very political. That is politically divisive. It's partisan. This is not partisan.
If you were a betting man, which I assume you're not, but if you're a betting man, would you say 50-50, 80-20, 25-75 that this is something we'll get through? Or
I rate it above 50%.
50-50.
Above
Okay.
50. Above 50%.
Above 50%. Okay. And Chairman Camp, what would you say of the chance of getting something through that? Your committee and the House of Representatives.
Well, you know, I think Max is right on all the points he made, and I would just say that, you know, the current code is indefensible. You know, people do have this sense that if only they knew somebody in Washington, they'd be paying a lower rate. So the sense of unfairness in the code, or some are getting a special deal because of the complexity and all the changes that Max mentioned have been made in the last few years. And for the other reasons that, we haven't seen the kind of growth and job creation that we need to see. And even if you have a job, you may have your hours reduced, your salary may not have increased. And so there really is this need for growth and jobs, and the complexity is enormous. And obviously people hire or prepare, they're afraid they're going to get audited, and under the current situation they may well be. But I think the concern is that people have this huge stack of papers they send into the IRS, and even small businesses. I had a man come in, he had one retail store, and his tax preparation fee was $9,000. And so the cost of compliance is enormous, and it's over $168 billion a year and 6 billion hours to comply. And so there's this huge sort of complexity that is laid over the nation that is really unproductive. So for all the reasons Max mentioned and others, it's really important we look at this. And look, I do think it's over 50%. There's a real, and I know there's a lot that this is bipartisan, a Republican and a Democrat. It's more like there's a senator and a House member working together that is important. But I got to tell you, the response I get from members of the committee and members of the House, they very much are interested in doing this. They're very excited about doing it because I think they believe, as we do, that the country needs this, and that if we can really make that concept that the American dream is still alive and well, and I think if we can get our economy growing and have people have this positive growth, we will have the American dream. The unemployment rate is, I don't mean to keep going, but is among young people is very high, and many of us have kids that are or have friends that have kids in that age group, and if you're in your 20s, you get an internship. You don't get hired. And so to get people the ability to start and really get on the road to prosperity, success, and whatever their choices are, I think is important to do.
So some people think that tax reform means, well, let me make it clear, tax reform is corporate and individual. You're talking about a comprehensive, not just one or the other, right? It's a comprehensive corporate and individual. Some people think tax reform means raising revenue. Some people think it means revenue neutral. So what is it going to be, revenue neutral or raising some revenue?
It's going to be both.
Both?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a good answer.
We're in Washington.
Right.
Compromise.
So
both.
You're going to do both, okay, in the same bill, okay?
Yeah.
No, well, there'll be a Senate bill and a House bill.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
So it'll be both.
well, Democrats generally would like to raise revenue, it's often said, in tax reform, and Republicans often say, over my dead body, are we going to raise revenue? So you think you can work that out in a conference, I guess, because, how are you going to deal with that? It's a big gap between revenue and no revenue.
Well, I think Dave put his finger on it. There'll be Dave and I, we meet weekly, have been for a long time. We go over this stuff lots.
Okay. Right.
And working together on this and agree on the same broad goals. It's rate reduction, it's base broadening, it's a very significant base broadening, significant rate reduction. And the House is Republican, Senate's Democratic. Therefore, the Senate bill that I come out with probably will have some revenue. The House bill at this point probably will not.
Okay.
So we meet, conference, that's the
Okay,
plan
let's
here.
suppose that's the case. Let me ask you about the process you just mentioned. Under the Constitution, revenue-raising bills are supposed to go first from the House. And so that would mean if you're going to do that, the House bill would pass first. But you're asking House members to vote for things that might be politically difficult without knowing whether the Senate's even going to pass a bill. Is that going to be hard to do?
Well, as Max said, we meet regularly, and we're both graduates of the we both completed our sentences on the super committee.
Right.
And so we have been talking about these
okay.
issues for a long time. But, we think it's regular order, and you build a bill from the ground up. And so we've both been meeting regularly. I've met with every member of the Ways and Means Committee individually. I'm going to complete my meetings with every Republican freshman in the Congress. Lots of listening sessions with members from off the committee and on the committee, 11 bipartisan working groups, more than 25 hearings in the House. I think together we've had more than 50 hearings. We had the first hearings together on this in 70 years between the Senate Finance and Ways and Means committees. And so there's been a lot of work done. And so the idea is, how do we get the policy right? It's not this end game of is there revenue, is there not revenue? But it's how can we develop the policy along the way? And I think in that area, a lot of this, the simplification side of it, it isn't as partisan as you might think on some of these items. So we're really trying to focus on those and move forward where we can.
Okay.
And it's not about how we figure out how it's not going to happen. We're sitting around figuring out how we can make this happen.
But do you agree the House will have to go first under the Constitution?
I think so.
The House will have to pass a bill first.
I think so. I think the House will
And
go
the
first.
Senate.
Well, not necessarily.
But yeah,
No?
I mean,
Okay.
hey,
Okay. All right. So you don't agree?
No, we agree on the result. And tactically, we're working out the tactics. For example, we could go first, then put it
Yes.
in a House passed
yes.
Yes. you
bill, a
could do
revenue
that.
bill. We can just substitute. And I just think it does make sense for us to look at that. That is,
Right.
Senate going first. 'Cause maybe and Dave and I have to make a judgment. Will that help the bill's success, if that is in the House, or will it not? Is it better for the House to go first? If
And-
that's just something we're going to have to.
Well, you can argue
And
on the
we-
Affordable Care Act, the Senate went first, more or less, you could say.
Yeah,
Or-
and immigration.
So,
We've both agreed that whatever avenue it takes to get this done, we're willing to try it.
okay.
So,
And the
and
President
those-
of the United States, has he called either of you and said, I really like tax reform and I want a revenue neutral bill or a revenue bill? Has he said anything, or has he indicated anybody in the administration care about this much?
They care. They're interested.
Okay.
This is different than '86. '86, President Reagan was the big driver for tax reform. But I don't think that that it's not the absence of, but because President Obama is not pushing as strongly as President Reagan did then, I don't think that's a problem.
Okay. Do you
Because
expect-
Dave can speak this better than I. If President Obama were to be out front, beating the drums for tax reform, it may have a little trouble over it with some members of the House of
I-
Representatives. And so I think it's good that he is where he is, namely engaged. We're talking. I spoke to him yesterday, and with Dennis McDonough very frequently. With Jack Lew weekly. I spoke to Jack Lew today. We're talking. We're working our way through all this, and so it's the White House is very much
Well,
involved.
they let you move forward. They're not going to send a bill up, in your view, a bill. Of
That's
what-
correct.
They won't send a bill. Okay. And you've had grassroots hearings already. I think you had one in Minnesota.
Yes,
And are you planning to have any more grassroots hearings around the country?
yes, several.
Can you tell us where you're going to have any of them, or any place we might go?
ahead.
Okay, we're going next to Philadelphia. I think it's the end of not the following week. I think it's
Yes, the
29th.
29th.
29th
Okay.
to Philadelphia.
And so, who testifies at these? Any
Well,
citizen
they're
can
not
sign
really.
up?
We
or-
don't, they're not formal hearings. We have many approaches, but one is to do things a bit differently. We have a joint website that,
Okay.
and we've received 10,000 some
Right.
submissions, and we want to talk to the country, not just regular garden variety,
Okay.
Senate and House hearings, but so we've received those submissions. Now we're going around the country as well, Dave and I, to the Twin Cities a week ago, 3M, a larger company, and Baldnigger Bakery, a smaller company. In Philadelphia, it's
Small business,
small businesses,
individuals.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're going to talk to somebody who sent us a submission, a very interesting submission,
Right.
and spend some time with him.
So, in Washington, we call deductions tax expenditures now. And so the biggest tax expenditures are things like mortgage interest deduction or charitable interest deduction or let's say municipal bond deduction.
State and local.
State and local. Those are probably the big four.
Right.
Which of those is going to go away
Yeah.
or would reduce?
No pun, but do you have a preference?
Well, I have some, but to be serious, obviously you probably can't eliminate all of them. You might moderate, but do you think that the pain should be shared among all of those, or are you likely to just go a little bit more in one? Or
Well, and
No.
not to
ahead.
cause nervousness in the room, but not everything in the code is a tax expenditure.
right?
So there are items that are not tax expenditures that are certainly going to be looked at. And we both agreed, to not take the current code and try to amend it, but try to start, I've said clean sheet of paper, and Max has said a clean slate, and see what we need to put into a
right.
21st century
Can you
tax code.
ask members of Congress in your respective committees and members of your whole bodies to give you ideas
Right.
of what they want to see or not see? And you've gotten a lot of submissions yet, or how is that going?
Yeah, well, and also, not only are Dave and I working together, but Senator Hatch, the ranking Republican, and I are working together, which is that we agreed on the approach. And the approach is start with a clean slate. Clean slate is okay. Let's get rid of all the tax expenditures.
Okay.
Roughly valued $12 trillion over 10 years. Rough. That's a very rough number. And then we start to build back. What do we want to put back into the code? We start out $12 trillion. That's $12 trillion revenue. So what's that revenue used for? Is that revenue going to be used for rate reduction? Is that revenue going to be used for static revenue reduction? It's probably almost entirely rate reduction. I've asked senators to send submissions, and they're starting to do that now.
Okay.
And I expect I'll get a flood of them near the end of this month. But just so we're clear, and Senator Hatch and I are working together. These submissions go to me, they go to Senator Hatch, and we're keeping them confidential because we want to encourage candid conversation with our members.
So has the leadership said in the Senate they will make time for a bill for this, and same in the House? They will bring it to the floor if you come up with an agreement in your committees?
I have full support from Senator Reid.
Okay.
He says to me, Max, just tell me what you want me to do. Tell me what you want me to do. How can I help you?
Okay. But one thing that often people will talk about is the value-added tax. That's not a tax deduction. It's not a tax we have now in this country. Right. Is the value-added tax something you'd even consider, or that's not even in the ballpark?
Well, obviously there was a Senate vote on that sort of, I think, describes that. But I don't think you want to have another layer of taxation in the code. But what I've said to my House members is, if you have something that's scored and that raises the revenue that's described in the budget, we'll look at it. So if there's another type of taxation, whether it's value-added tax or fair tax or some of these other ideas, flat tax, that are out there, as long as the Joint Committee on Taxation scores it and it meets the benchmarks, we'll obviously consider that in the committee. And we've done a bipartisan process with the working groups a little bit differently than the Senate. We've had 1,300 submissions on that, either from groups or other members, and obviously compiled that in a joint committee report that has been issued.
And I might add to that, too, there is some interest in the Finance Committee to do what you just suggested. And part of this is just sit down with the members and let's find out how much support there may or may not be.
In the last Congress, I guess at the end of the Congress, or in the lame duck part of it, the Congress agreed to increase the capital gains rate, I think from 15 to 20%, and the dividends rate as well. Now that that has increased, do you think it's likely that it will ever go up again in this reform bill, or you've kind of done with that, or maybe capital gains could go up? Could it go down? But probably not. But what would you like to would you like to say that as to capital gains, that's not likely to be changed, or you can't say anything yet?
Well,
That's right.
I think
Okay. I can try. So
it is a good try.
Marginal rates. You think marginal rates could go up for high-income people as well, or you just can't say yet?
Look, everything's on the table.
Everything's on the table. Okay. All right. I'm not going to get any specific.
But I think growth and simplicity and fairness, and I obviously say revenue neutrality, but those are the things that are sort of the benchmarks that we're trying to look at. Those are kind of the parameters.
Let's shift to another subject for a moment, the Affordable Care Act. Your committee's dealt with that before, and the President has announced that he's going to postpone implementation of one part of it, important part, for 1 year. Is that of concern to you, or do you think that's a good decision to postpone it for a year, the coverage?
Well, I mean, obviously we just had votes on this yesterday in the House, and it was a bipartisan vote, not only to codify what the President did with regard to the employer mandate, but also to repeal the individual mandate or postpone it for a year. So I think there's a lot of concerns, and I guess I think there were so many Democrats supporting the individual side. Is that if you're going to do this for business, what about for individuals and families? And so I do think, even though we had assurances that this would be implemented on time, it's not moving on time. There are lots of problems with it, and so I think this is clearly an indication. The Teamsters just wrote a letter to the leaders, the Democrat leaders, and basically said this is going to destroy the ability of working Americans to have health care. So I think that these problems have to be admitted, and I think we need to clearly look at it. Now, the only bill that actually reduced premiums, according to CBO, was the Republican version that was debated during the health care debate. I think that's the direction we want to go, is how do we get premiums down so people can afford insurance.
Now, Medicare is often said to be one of the biggest problems in the federal government's budget because it's growing at a very large rate. Are you planning to do anything on Medicare in this Congress, either of your committees, in terms of dealing with the problems there?
Let me go back to your last question. Dave and I are on track with tax reform.
Okay. All right.
We have a slightly different view on implementing the Affordable Care Act.
Okay.
I believe that it was proper for the administration to delay for 1 year the employer mandate. It's a big act. I supported the bill strongly. A couple of years working on it to get it passed. The individual mandate, though, is more of an integral part of the statute because actuarially it is important that young males sign up so that health care is provided for everybody, also with the expansion of Medicaid. So and I'm spending a lot of time with the administration on implementation. I just want this bill to be implemented correctly. It's here. The Supreme Court upheld it. It's not going to be repealed. So let's make it work the best way we possibly can. That's the course I think we should take.
On Medicare, do you think there's any solution to that in this Congress?
I do. I mean, we've in the committee announced a series of hearings on entitlements, including Social Security and Medicare. I released a discussion draft on some parts of sort of the ideas that are out there, legislative language in terms of Social Security. A lot of this has been discussed for many years, whether it's Rivlin Domenici or whether it's Bull Simpson or Biden Cantor or super committee. So a lot of these ideas are there. I think now what we need to do is really set sort of the committee structure to really build the background for that. I think there's obviously different views on how to approach that, but clearly I think that needs to be part of the discussion, especially as we move into these issues that have to be resolved by the end of the year, whether it's debt limit or others. Those are going to have to be resolved, and those might have an opportunity to come forward to help us resolve some of those other issues.
And I might say it's not too difficult conceptually, because Dave and I have been on other efforts.
Yeah.
Bull Simpson, super committee, and
right.
Biden. You on Biden?
No, thank God.
Yeah, Biden. But this is an interesting point, because those efforts failed in part. Super committee and Biden deficit reduction, because 2/3 of the members had no knowledge of the subject. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but they were not on appropriations committees. They were not on Finance or Ways and Means Committee. So 2/3 of the time was educating members of the committee as to our appropriations provisions, as well as our tax law, as well as our entitlement provisions. But we've had a lot of these meetings now, in super committee, for example. So we tend to know what the major pieces are with respect to entitlement reform. So if there's a role there, sometime this fall, that can be put together pretty quickly. And an important point is that the committees of jurisdiction are involved because they're the committees that do know better the ins and outs and trade-offs that are involved.
Now, both of you served on the so-called super committee, and since the super committee couldn't come to an agreement, sequestration more or less went into effect, and it's in effect now, and it seems like it'll be in effect for a while. Do you think if the super committee were to reconvene today, the same members, they would try to come up with a solution because they don't like sequestration, or would they come up with the same solution?
Well, it's interesting.
I'll let you do that one.
Okay.
No, it's very interesting. 2/3 of the way through the super committee, because it's so difficult, we weren't getting very far. And remember the sidebar, Patty and Jeb Hensel, the co-chairs, never met each other until the committee began.
Right. That's right.
And that's part of the problem here. The members of Congress and Senate just don't work together very much. And it's a process I've initiated is man, oh man, I'm talking to everybody and encouraging all of us to talk to everybody. Dave's talking to all Ways and Means. I'm meeting every single senator on tax reform. We put together, we call them burgers and beer over at Irish Times. Twice a month, we just 6 House members, 6 senators, and just get to know each other and just talking and get together. But my point I was going to make is that back in super committee, things are getting bogged down. We weren't getting very far. And the committee said, well, let Max and Dave do it.
Yes.
And so they turned it over to us, to Dave and to me.
Yeah.
And we sat down, our staff sat down. It was a lot of hard work. And we came up with a solution.
Close. Yeah, we did.
And it was not $4 trillion debt reduction. It was about 3, as I recall. So,
We got close.
and we had a little resistance
The problem
with
isn't
the
you
leadership.
two, in other words, it's maybe other people in the Congress.
Well, this idea that you're going to have a small group of people then impose something on the rest of the Congress is not going to work. So I think one of the things that was important to do, and that's why we've had so many hearings and so much outreach on tax reform, is to really involve members. So this is something. So I don't think reconvening a super committee would really be helpful because of that dynamic. And so. That's why on the entitlement piece you were mentioning, we're doing hearings, we're putting out legislative text so that this is a possibility. It doesn't mean you're going to succeed, but I think your chances of succeeding are a lot better if you've got that kind of process. Again, Rice, you build a bill from the ground up. You have people involved and more importantly, you have interested parties, stakeholders who actually are a part of this process.
It's a really good point. We in the Finance Committee, the last 3 months, meet weekly, members only, to go over different parts of the code. Because so many members of the committee are new, or because we've not passed a major tax bill since '86, it's a wonderful learning process. Now that's a double-edged sword. One edge is people don't know much, but that's all. The good side is that they don't know much, so that when experts explain different parts of the code to us, and senators around the table, bipartisan, ask questions, we're mutually searching together to try to get the facts. And it's bringing us together psychologically, and we get to know each other better, and building trust together. And it's Dave's point. The more we can just build trust up, the more it's going to help here.
Well, and even, most members know, the 3 or 4 provisions that are important to their state or their district or that they've gotten interested in. But when you're doing the entire tax code, nobody is an expert on the entire tax code. So it is important to really have those opportunities to work through it, as opposed to trying to impose a solution.
Right.
Would you have the same view on Simpson-Bowles or Bowles-Simpson? If that commission recommendations had been adopted by the Congress, do you think we'd be better off today or worse off today?
Well, it's many people. First of all, Bowles-Simpson performed a terrific service, bipartisan, trying to address the debt problems this country faces, both spending and revenue side. But it's changed a lot over time. There are different versions of Bowles-Simpson. Many members of Congress say, pass Bowles-Simpson, not knowing what's in Bowles-Simpson. And if they knew the details, they get really hung up. I believe that we can't willy-nilly just layer Bowles-Simpson on top of what we're doing. Rather, take a lot of their work, too. They did a lot of valuable work, as did Rubenstein and others. And as Dave said, take at least respect to the Finance Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, just build it up there. So those are the committees of jurisdiction, and they also want to be involved. So I think that's the process we're undertaking. I think one has a better chance of success.
Now, when you joined the Senate in 1978, the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee was Russell Long.
Correct.
And how did the committee operate in those days? A little differently? And how would you say, generally, since you've been in Congress for a while, how is Congress really different than when you first came? Is it much more rewarding or much more frustrating?
Well, you asked 2 different questions.
Okay, well, you can pick either one.
Okay. The committee is pretty much the same. We're quite collegial. We work pretty well together. That's not changed much. It's the Congress in this town that has changed since then, and that does have some influence on the committee. But basically, we're very collegial. We work together. I think partly because a lot of it's numbers, it's taxes. It's trying to figure out how to put those pieces together, as opposed to, say, Judiciary Committees and abortion and constitutional issues.
But when you first came to Congress, did the Democrats and Republicans talk together more, or is that just a myth?
It's not a myth. We talk more. I don't like to take too much time here. When I arrived, there's this private senator's dining room, which you know about. It's a little room for senators only, just off the Senate dining room. only senators, no spouses, no staff, nobody, just senators. It's a wonderful place to go, just to go see who's going to be in there, and to see, you meet other senators that you otherwise wouldn't meet, or more importantly, talk to them, learn about the kids and their families and some of the legislation. It's empty now. Nobody goes there anymore. Why? Because they're doing other things. What are they doing? They're going to all these doggone party lunches, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So all these Democrats, we Democrats, we're having lunch together, saying all those nasty people down the hall. Those Republicans, they're terrible, and Republicans are doing the same thing. Those nasty Democrats. So and it's fundraising. Fundraising noon hour at noontime pulls us apart too. But it's also symbolic of how we just don't talk enough.
When I get invited to have lunch there, I thought it was a big deal. Now you're saying it's not that big a deal because everybody's putting people elsewhere. Okay, I got it. So there was the House much more partisan than you possibly imagined when you joined?
Well, obviously the biggest difference in the Ways and Means Committee is I got on the committee in the minority, and now I'm in the majority and chairing the committee, so that's a big difference. But it was not exactly completely bipartisan then. I mean, the chairman then had proxy voting and was able to throw the press out of the room and go back and write the bill how he wanted to. So it was a very different time. And but I do think there was more sort of discussion. And for example, Democrat Bob Matsui was actually very friendly to me. Always, we got to know each other. We were friends on the committee. I think over time there's been less of that. I think that's why there was such a great response from our members on these bipartisan working groups. Their schedulers had to call each other. They actually had to meet, and they actually found that they enjoyed working together. So I do think we need to get back to that. I think over time that's eroded, and the House typically is more one-party rule than the Senate, and that's sort of the way this whole government was structured in terms of that. But I do think, given that there is a Republican House, a Democrat Senate, and a Democrat President, a bill to be signed is going to be bipartisan. I mean, it doesn't take a scientist to figure that out. So that's what I think is important, at least on this and other issues. And look, we've had 7 bipartisan trade bills signed into law. And I mean, both Max and I have worked very closely on those, and I think that is a model for how we need to do some of these other things.
And I'm reminded of a story when Senator Russell Long was the chairman. He was the chairman for a long time in the Finance Committee. And the 1980 election, the Senate went Republican.
It's a good story.
And so somebody said to Senator Dole, "You're going to be chairman of the Senate Finance Committee." And he said, "Yeah, but who's going to tell Russell Long?"
Yeah.
The fact that both of you will not, well, unless there's a waiver in the House, and maybe there could be one, but let's assume for a moment there isn't, neither of you will be in the current position in the next Congress. Does that make it easier for you to get tax reform through or harder?
Easier.
Easier.
Because
okay.
I have much more time to devote to it. I'm not campaigning. Don't have to go out there by a tin cup, ask for campaign contributions. Okay. And psychologically, it's helpful because I'm doing what I came here to do, legislate, not campaign, but to legislate. And I like doing stuff, and it's helping a lot.
So just on a personal side, when you retire at the end of the Congress, do you intend to do teaching, business, law, go back to Montana, run more marathons? What would you like to do?
Nice try.
All right.
No,
All right.
I don't know yet.
You don't know.
We'll figure that out. Okay.
But you do run marathons.
Yes.
And you run ultra marathons.
Have.
And what's it like to run? What's it, 100 miles or something?
I only do 50s.
Oh, 50. Okay, 50 miles. Okay. All right. Congressman, are you interested in having a waiver, or would you think of maybe running for the open Senate seat in Michigan?
Well, look, in the House, we have 2-year cycles all the time, and there's no guarantee that you're going to have the majority after 2 years. So, I think in the House, we tend not to have sort of that longer view.
Okay.
So, look, you just make the most of the 2 years you have. That's what I'm going to do, and
Right.
that's where I'm
They'll
focused.
give them a waiver.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. So
They have happened before.
Right.
on trade, let's talk about trade for a moment. The administration would like to get a trade agreement in Asia, and it needs to do that. It needs what's called fast-track authority, so there's no
Right.
amendments.
Right.
Do you think that you can get the fast-track authority through for the TPP and the Asian trade agreement?
Yep, I do.
I do.
We're introducing a bill, hopefully by the end of this month. It might slip to September, but yes, Senator Hatch and I talked about this just yesterday, and we have something called the Big Four.
Right.
Dave and I and our staffs and Sandy Levin and Hatch, the four of us meet on all issues that are relevant to our committees, and this is clearly one. And we're close to getting an agreement on TPP.
We've been working on it.
Okay, I think that'll get done.
Yeah.
And today, when you're as a chairman of the Finance Committee, today you meet lots of people, lobbyists come in, business people come in, and so forth. What is usually a persuasive argument to something? I mean, is it just, hear the merits? What do you find is persuasive when you hear people talk?
Well, it's like anything else.
The truth.
Yeah, it's is it right? Does it make sense? Is it considered all the relevant points of view, not just special pleader, me? Is it thoughtful?
How does somebody persuade you?
Well, I think both of us were pretty inspired by what we saw in Minnesota. When you get out and actually get a real life situation, and we saw, for example, at 3M, the incredible innovation and the great things that Americans are doing, and then heard about how the code was making it harder for them to do that. And then going to the bakery that Max mentioned, 4 generations of a family running this bakery, and what how they've been able to innovate. And so when you can take the issue and then personalize it to make it understandable, I think those are the important meetings. And that sometimes happens in meetings. You get a picture of that as well. But that's why I think the trips that we're going to take going out are going to be
Yeah, and I
so
might
helpful.
say, too, I was struck, there's a recent Harvard Business School survey of 10,000 Harvard Business School grads who said that the primary problem they have is U.S. tax code. That is, these are people around the world, and it's our complexity, U.S. tax code complexity, it's our higher rates, it's both, but I think it's the most difficult problem they have with respect to doing business in the United States is our tax code.
Let me address that issue. Right now, some people come to members of Congress and say, let's bring cash back from overseas, because if we do that, we'll have more cash in the United States, create more jobs and so forth. And let's have it brought back at a lower tax rate. The Joint Revenue Committee basically says this money is ultimately going to come back at a 35% tax rate. So if it comes back at a lower tax rate, we're going to have a bigger budget deficit. But is it fair to say that it's ever going to come back, and therefore is there any way out of this dilemma? Because right now you're assuming it's coming back, but it's probably never going to come back, and so you're never going to get this money, and therefore you're worse off. How do you solve that problem?
Well, in the House, I've put out 3 discussion drafts, and one is on the international piece. And I think it's critical that on a regular basis, companies are able to bring back those dollars that they've earned overseas without a double tax. And that's one of the areas where we're not competitive, obviously the statutory rate and other things. So we need to do that, not in a one-time, not in a holiday, but in a regular basis. And so in the draft that's out there, there is an ability to do that. There's some base erosion options on that, and we're obviously working through that in the committee to try to find, and obviously we've gotten a lot of feedback. It's been out there since October of last year. So it's an area that is very complicated, affects different industries and different sectors, different ways. But it is essential for us to compete in the world. And look, they think it's now almost $2 trillion. How can we get that invested here in the U.S. to create jobs here? We want these, large multinational companies platformed in the United States doing business around the world, because the jobs that are here that are supporting that activity are incredible jobs.
We're on the same. Sorry.
Yeah.
We're on the same page on that one. As Dave says, not one off, but we've got to set up a system where those dollars are not trapped overseas.
And right now, QE3 has been something that people have talked a lot about, and whether the Federal Reserve will taper off the mortgage buying. Do you have a view on whether QE3 was a good thing, not a good thing, should be tapered, or not? And do you have a view on whether Ben Bernanke should have another term?
Well, that's up to Ben Bernanke, but I think he's done a good job. I think quantitative easing has been very helpful. It's been helpful to the U.S., European banks easing credit has been helpful. Japan, it's helpful. Interest rates are low. He's certainly concerned about potential long-term inflation, but I think he's done a super job. I mean, my understanding is he'd rather not have another term. But if the president prevails upon him, maybe he will be serving another term. I don't know. Sounds like the president's not going in that direction. I think he's done a good job. He makes a point, though, which I think is also valid, namely, he's doing the best he can with monetary policy. And he's saying, hey, you guys over there, a little better fiscal policy, you, Congress and the president, that'd be helpful too.
Your view of Ben Bernanke, how is he regarded in the House Republican circles?
I mean, I think a little differently in the sense of I think the concern about inflation and the printing of money is a fairly significant one. But again, it's not the total picture. We have a lot of work to do in the House in terms of the budget and the deficits and trying to get pro-growth policies. And as you look at that, that's why we both think tax reform is so important, because if we can get economic growth and we can get jobs, that will mean more revenue to the government. And I think having GDP less than 2% is completely unacceptable. So I think that there's a lot for us to do. I think we've had a lot of quantitative easing, just from my view, but some of it was necessary. But I think we're at a point where I'm very concerned about the long-term inflationary aspects of that.
So if people are watching on C-SPAN or people in this audience and they were interested in tax reform, what is the best way to communicate with you or your staffs about the preferences they want to keep, or the ones that they want you to add, or how they would change it? Is it just to write your staff or to send you emails? What is the best way to communicate with you?
Well, all of the above. It's, we have a website, taxreform.gov. A lot of people use the internet these days. Write us, call us up.
Okay.
We're both very accessible.
All right. Congressman?
Well, I'd say taxreform.gov for somebody just watching and they're around the country. That's probably the easiest way to get that right into, and we're going through those. So.
Now, Congressman, you just celebrated your 60th birthday last week.
Thank you for reminding everyone of that.
I've noted, I'll just give you a hint. When you turn 60, as I did a few years ago, people come up to you all the time and say, you look good today, as opposed to, anyway, you had a health issue a while ago, and people who are watching be interested to know you dealt with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yes.
And you were fully treated, and you were in complete remission?
Yes, well, thank you for asking on that. Yes, and completed the treatment, and obviously there are 24 different kinds of lymphoma. There's many different kinds, but obviously the one I had was very treatable, went through the treatment and successfully completed it. So I had a lot of encouragement and support, and obviously if you know anybody who's going through something like that, don't hesitate. Send them that text or write them that card, because it really does help you if you're going through that to know that there are people out there thinking about you.
So final question for both of you. You've served distinguished careers in the Senate and the House. Now knowing everything you know about it, what it is to be a member of Congress, would you have decided to do this with your career knowing everything you now know? Was it a career that you're happy with and fulfilling, and you're very satisfied with what you've accomplished? And what's been the most frustrating thing about having this job?
Well, I would not have it any other way. I think it's the best job in the world. I feel so lucky to be able to serve Montana, the United States Senate, and be involved in all these issues that we're talking about, and trying to make a difference in many more issues. There's frustrations, obviously, with everything, but the rewards, the psychic rewards of service, public service, this means, to me, is more than outweighs any of the potential frustrations. I recommend for everybody.
But you've had your last election.
I've had my last election. I'm now looking at next chapter, trying to figure that out.
All right.
But I wouldn't change anything.
Congressman,
Well, I may not have had my last election, so I may look at it a little differently. But yeah, I think probably the thing that is most interesting is just the quality of people and the things they're doing that you learn in a job like this, where you're exposed to so many different industries and people from different walks of life. And I think you just come away with this huge respect for the freedom this country offers people and what they're able to do with it. Obviously, we have a lot of needs, and I realize not everybody is successful, and I don't come from a wealthy district, but it is really important to see what this country can offer. So I just come back with a great respect for America and for the people who've made this country great, and most of them are not in the U.S. Congress, but you do get an opportunity to see all of that.
It's just important for us to remember how lucky we are to be Americans. I think we sometimes take that for granted.
Yeah.
We are so incredibly lucky. You don't see people heading the door live in other countries. rather they want to live in America. That's why we have immigration legislation. But we are really lucky. And it's, I don't want to go too far down this, but in Scripture, as much is expected from those to whom much has been given. We, as Americans, have been given so much. We have an obligation to give back, and it's wonderful giving back.
Senator, thank you for your distinguished service over many years in Washington, and obviously you have several years to go. And Chairman Camp, thank you very much for what you're doing, and thank you very much for being here today. We enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Yeah. Great job, Max. You did a great job.